So welcome, Peter, to the latest of our PlantLab conversations, interview discussions. For those who are watching, PlantLab is very kindly supported by Manu Taonga, the Ministry of Cultural Heritage, and these particular webinars are supported by Zoom webinars. So thank you for those who are supporting us. PlantLab is a cross-disciplinary installation, creative innovation project, and a CBD regeneration project. And the goal of it is to really get people thinking outside the boxes that they have in terms of their practice, particularly creative practitioners, but also getting people to think about how we can engage more across science, tech, humanities, arts, etc., and move outside the traditional silos that they've worked in. So it's kind of inspiring that. And as part of that, I would love to introduce you to Peter Bruce-Iri, who is a former colleague of mine in a couple of different guises, a well-known local Te Tai Tokerau advocate in all things related to regenerative agriculture and climate change, a very strong networker with a very strong business base, and here to talk about his fascinating research. But Peter, perhaps if we start with you saying a little bit about yourself and introducing yourself to those watching, please, including those who are international and don't quite know, what some of the context is here.
Oh, thanks very much, Maggie. Kia ora koutou. I'm Peter Bruce-Iri. I'm from Northland. I've lived in Tai Tokerau pretty much all of my life. I was born here. I was on the banks of the Northern Waiara River, which is on the west coast, and I grew up here. And I had a long career teaching at North Tech. I started off teaching horticulture, and then I moved on to teaching business. So that led me into research, and the research became around regenerative food systems and climate change. So I think it's highly, highly relevant to PlantLab. That's a little bit of my background. I think since I left North Tech last year, I'm now contracting to Kahoa Toinui, which is the iwi Leaders Forum for Tai Tokerau. So that's enabled me to not shift my work, because my wife is Māori, and I've been wanting to integrate Māori thinking, mataranga, into my work for a long time. And that's been happening for a while. So when I did my master's, completed my master's, it was around Māori identity at work. And now working with Te Kahoa Toinui gives me an opportunity to deepen those understandings, I think. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you.
That's
so
a part of history.
You've got a book out on your work. So the kōrero today is a little bit about your practice, what you've been researching yourself, and how that intersects with what we're looking at in PlantLab and how that can feed into what we're doing. So tell us a little about that. I'll let you go.
Yeah, and I guess that has whakapapa too, because when I wrote the bio for my book, I went back to my teachers back in primary school in 1962. I was on the other side of the earth here, and probably that's the same time that Rachel Carson's Silent Spring came out, and very quickly some of my teachers picked up on that, and they started talking about pollution and issues like that. Little did they know what we were in for. And as a young man, I was a member of the Soil Association of the Northern Waiara, and that's been an interest of mine really throughout my life. So when people started talking about climate change, what was interesting there was that the first talk, the things you have to do is to reduce your consumption of oil, of course. So I didn't think I could afford an electric car, so I bought an electric bike, and then I bought an electric car. But then I was introduced to this book, Drawdown, by Paul Hawken. And what interested me about that is he suggested 80 solutions to climate change, and the third largest was food waste, and that sort of blew me away. He also started talking about regenerative agriculture, so I got very interested in that. Now, unfortunately, you can do brilliant work like this, but you can get stuck in the paradigm, and that's where I think Paul Hawken is. So through a friend, I was introduced to the thinking of Walter Jenner, who's an Australian soil scientist and climate scientist. And that shifted my thinking from the carbon paradigm to looking at plants. So finding myself at a loose end after completing my work at Nortec, I wrote this book here, How Plants Cool and Heal the Climate. And I wrote that actually in about 10 weeks at the beginning of the year, because you can't muck around with these things. Yeah, things are quite urgent. And so that's what I'll focus my my presentation on.
Oh, great. Yeah, and we'll hear about at the end how people can get hold of that book if they want to as well. So, so maybe if you share screen, Peter, that would be great.
Now I'll just find the little button. Oh, yeah. You'll soon see why this cover is how it is. So the message is it's much more than greenhouse gases. Okay, in fact, it's very sad that we're so wedded into that, and I'm not finding many people who aren't. It's about, we do have to reduce those greenhouse gases, but we also have to regenerate the planet's vegetation, and that is the absolute key. So you might have seen there's a something up here just above my eye line that's talking about, should we put a sunshade in space and stop the heat of the sun coming in? Well, like, absolutely not. Or should we get a carbon sucking machine and suck the carbon out of the air? But we've got things that do that already. So you're ready for the silver bullet. Well, it's a green bullet. It's photosynthesis. So this is a beautiful image of a plant cell, and you can see the chloroplasts. And if this was live, you'd see them streaming around. And you will all know how photosynthesis works. But one of the things that is less known is the cooling impact of photosynthesis, and I'll get onto that soon. So this photo here was taken through a window, so there's some strange things going on. But what I liked about this image when I saw it was that it shows you that sort of translucent effect of the plant leaf. And you can see in some cases where the plant leaves have doubled up, there's a little more, it's not so translucent. So what these things are, and I was actually talking to a guy who'd done a PhD in botany recently. And I said to him, these plant leaves are actually like mini glass houses. And he said, oh, I hadn't thought of that. It was really interesting, because this doesn't sort of get you to imagine in that way. But if I go back up to here, you can imagine that those plant cells are, when they're exposed to the sun, will be trapping energy. And they have to trap energy to create the magic of photosynthesis. So what does that do? Well, over summer, I got a here we go. I got a thermal lens for my camera. Here it is here. Oh, hang on, sorry. Sorry for my cell phone, okay? Just it's got a USB-C plug on the end, and I took these photos. And you can see the results. Now, if you look at where the tree is, in the side-by-side image, you can see there that the tree's a lot cooler than some other places. The hottest place is the paving down the bottom. Now the angles, while these are taken roughly the same place, the nature of the lens is sort of has a different perspective. So it's hard to see the exact the equivalence, but it's quite clear if you look at that temperature down the bottom, 25 degrees, and I can't see it at the top of my screen here, but I think it's something like 45,
46, yeah.
46. So there's a 21-degree difference in that photo. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about carbon dioxide, if we do things, like breathe less and things like that, we won't be putting that carbon dioxide into the air. And it might be, like there'll be an infinitesimal impact on the climate. But with a situation like this, if we're seeking to reduce the temperature, there's a stunning difference in. So what do we need? We just need more plants. How this works, there's two sorts of radiant energies coming in from the sun. Okay, and what happens? There's a law. I've written the name there, Stefan Boltzmann law, and I'll try to explain it to you, but I don't really understand it. But what it basically says is that when a black body receives radiant energy, it heats up exponentially. So it's interesting, isn't it? That you can get such an increase in heat. But what plants are doing is that in the act of photosynthesis, water is being turned into steam, into vapor, and it is going through this sort of, ideally, it's going through this escalator that takes it out to space. Because we have roughly 342 square meters of energy per square, kilowatts per square meter coming in. And if we're going to have a stable situation, we have the same amount going out. So heat goes out to space. If it didn't, we would be fried. There's the science of it. And I'm sort of just a year one scientist. I was teaching soil science at diploma level. Now, here's another photo. This is Kensington. And that's the Coprosma Pornites, I think it's called. And you can see the radical difference there too. This time the difference is nearly 30 degrees. So that's a bark mulch, which you think would be more benign for the environment, but in fact it isn't. It's really interesting that piece of wood there is cooler, probably because it has more bulk. You know what I mean? It's going to take longer to warm up. But if you look at that dramatic difference in the temperature there. Here's another one. I was at Glennscully over on the west coast, and the sand dunes. The day was roughly probably in the mid-20s, and you could see the spinifex, the native plant, suffers in the heat. But the spinifex was still 44 degrees. The sand was 71 degrees.
Wow. Yeah.
You'll know that from having probably walked on hot sand yourselves. Yeah. Really, really, really fascinating differences. I have quite a few photos like that. So could it be that we've removed too much of the planet's vegetation? Could that be the problem? And if so, the good news is we have the ability to restore it. And it's encouraging, because my first understandings of climate change, you sheet it back to the beginning of the industrial age. You've got a whole lot of fossil fuels being burnt, and also we've got an accelerating population. But then when you think about it some more, you actually sheet it back to the beginning of the agricultural age, because we were clearing land. But actually, it goes back further. It goes back to the time when we collectively came out of Africa, because in Africa we had some sort of an equilibrium with the megafauna. They'd got used to us, but when we went out of Africa, we came across new populations of megafauna that didn't know us, and we were able to kill them. By the time we got to places like North America, we had better weapons, and we were doing it more quickly. And so it's interesting sort of then to ponder what the nature of indigeneity is, because all populations that move somewhere else initially are colonizers that really don't have have empathy with the new environment, but then over time they indigenize. So there are some interesting examples there. I think in Australia, for example, they probably disrupted the monsoon. They certainly killed the megafauna, disrupted the monsoon, and probably tipped that continent into the state it's in now. But then they also started to empathize more with their land, and they found ways to sort of heal it to some extent. So this is the NASA energy budget, and I quite like this one because it shows the incoming radiation at 340 watts per square meter. It says here, and that's sort of averaged across the Earth, because half the Earth is getting none. And so, but the red one is the other heat dynamics that are happening. So it's interesting when I listen to Walter Jenner, for example, he says, well, if we can increase, for example, our cloud albedo by 2% or 1%, that would have a significant difference and move us back more towards the equilibrium. What I've done now is I've made a complicated diagram even more complicated. So if you look at number one there, the strategy there would be to increase high albedo clouds. Now, I've got some ideas on that I'll put past you soon. Numbers 2 and 3, increase hydrology, increase the soil carbon sponge, and vegetation and reduce bare surfaces. And that by having more plants, you have more latent heat, less seasonal heat. You have more, plants produce water vapor that produces hydroxyl that oxidizes methane. So, there really is no issue with methane in a country where you've got actively growing pasture.
Can I ask, what's albedo? Albedo, what term does that mean? What kind of clouds?
Albedo is the reflection of sunlight off a white surface.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So clouds that have high reflective capacity is essentially what that means.
Yeah. And some clouds have got higher capacity than others. And that's why in some places they're talking to people about painting their roofs white.
Oh, yeah. No, that's interesting. And then when it says increase hydrology, does that mean the infrastructure through which water moves? So creating
just the whole cycle itself.
Right. Yeah.
Because the cycle can if you degenerate, the Earth will get drier and you'll get less sort of activity, less hydrology and less carbon. But if you regenerate, it'll go the other way. It's interesting, because it's probably never going to be static. It'll be going either in one direction or the other. Increasing surface albedo is another. And then when you look at 5 and 6, that's about the impact of the greenhouse gases. So here, what you've got is the window of space at the top where it comes in and goes out. You've got the surface where there's dynamics happening, but then you've got the atmosphere where what's happening there will either help us cool or further heat the planet. Now, what Walter Jenner says is that we have to reopen the nighttime re-radiation windows. So what we've done, the problem that we've created with fossil fuels is that we've created these particles that don't really, that just create humid hazes and don't create terrain. So we've got to really clear the air. And now this is a little contentious because they talk about when after 9/11, when there were fewer planes flying around the United States, it actually warmed up a bit because there wasn't an obstruction to the radiant energy coming in. But on the other hand, when our best opportunity to cool down is at night. So when if we can clear that humid haze, open the skies up, a lot of heat will escape at night. And you know this yourself, if you have a clear night before you go to bed, if it's clear all night, it'll be cold in the morning. These are these dynamics. And so I think there's a lesson there too, because we have to both try and understand the science, but we also have to be aware of our own observations and what we can glean about the world ourselves. So the other thing too is that we really have to do whatever we can in the service of life and recognize the complexity in ecosystems. And this is just a really scaled down version of what's probably a very complex ecosystem. But whale poo generates a lot of growth in phytoplankton. Phytoplankton's eaten by krill, which are eaten by whales. Now, apparently, whale poo is voluminous. That's been confirmed by a diver, Glenn Edney. You may know Glenn Edney. Yes, and he's actually been through it. So yeah, second hand from Glenn. Yeah. Now, the other interesting thing about this, though, they found that when a whole lot of millions of whales were killed, you'd think you'd get an increase in krill, but no, you didn't, because this dynamic was happening. Yeah. So the other thing that happens, those phytoplankton over there, what they do is that they release aerosols into the air. Well, even though they're actually in the air themselves, thrown up in spray and that from the ocean, and they nucleate rain. So what we've discovered recently is that there is biological nucleation of rain. And that's very important. Just to deviate a little bit, in deserts, dust, in colder environments, dust can actually nucleate rain, but in hot environments, like hot deserts, it can't. You need that biological nucleation. So what I've midway through my book, I've looked at 5 different sort of locations where I felt were some places where we could actually make a big difference in each of these: regenerative agriculture, forests, oceans, dry places, and cities. And I'll briefly go through those. So first, regenerative agriculture. I love this method of farming, and you can imagine the difference going into a paddock of ryegrass or perhaps kikuyu and maybe a little bit of clover into something like this. Because we know that cows are very intelligent. They eat what they need. Animals are very intelligent generally, unlike us. So they're taking on all sorts of things. There's a guy over in just south of Dargaville who did a summer crop for silage, and he had 6 plants in that crop. One of them was, he had sunflowers, because sunflowers go into the earth and free up the soil. He also had linen, flax, linseed. And of course, the linseed is rich in omega-3, I think. So you can imagine what happens with the health of the cows. So, and you've got deep soils, and you've got this magic happening between pasture, animals, and the soil. And so you're probably aware that in places like in North America, with the huge herds of bison they had, the soil became meters deep. Then, of course, it was all blown away, during the Dust Bowl years because of cultivation. So we really need a more nuanced discussion around agriculture. Like if you want to be a vegan, that's fair enough from an ethical perspective. But as an ideology, it's not so good, because it points to the fact that these things are the problem. So yeah, George Monbiot, there might be a whole lot more of them in 40 years, according to your calculations, but they don't drive SUVs. So deserts. Oh, deserts and forests, I guess too. Yeah. Now this is interesting, because this is I was looking for temperatures, and this is at the same time of the year. I can't recall the time of the year, but In the Amazon, the temperature average from 9 degrees to 28 degrees. Okay, so I tried to find a hot place near the equator. This Rio Negro was very near the equator. I found Galcaccio. It's the first time I've actually tried to say that. The average temperature is 19 to 37. So you're looking at a almost 10 degrees difference in the top temperature there. And then further north, Algeria. Now that's in Egypt. But if you follow the map across, you can see the bottom of Spain, and the bottom of Spain, top of Africa, is roughly equivalent to where we are in terms of latitude. Okay, so not that far from us. Still, you got a temperature of 7 to 37. So plants cool the planet. Now, the other thing that you may, and if you've got, actually, Maggie, I should send you this link because there's a movie. Actually, I want to get it to I think you can hire it, for presentations, and it's called Rivers Above the Canopy, and it talks about the notion of flying rivers and the biotic pump, and how, for example, the water in China comes from these flying rivers that go across the top of Europe and across the top of Asia and down into China. And then, there's a flying river. They say there's more water flying above the Amazon than there is in the Amazon River. And it delivers rain down to a very fertile part of South America. We were taught in school that the rain just gets picked up from the ocean, and dumps on the land, but it's actually, we need to be open to a little more nuance than that. So rain is very, very important. The ocean, it's interesting, I mean, look at the image of the plankton, phytoplankton. It's like jewels, really, sort of hairy jewels. And this is a beautiful photo here. This is from Brian Deans. He gave me permission to use it. And this is from where I hang out in the summer, Glyn's Gully over on the west coast. And you can see the plankton there. So that plankton accounts for more than 50% of our oxygen. Some say 70% of our oxygen. So how do we optimize it? Yeah. And of course, when it as part of photosynthesis, it's taking in carbon. Some of that carbon will just be, maybe some of that plankton will be eaten by whale, perhaps, and the whales just sink to the bottom. So deserts. Now this isn't it interesting too, because we've got in the West, we've got all this money and all this technology we throw at these issues. You've got to say no success, really. I mean, if you're going to rate our success at healing the planet or reversing global warming, it's been a failure. But in places like India, what they can do, there's more desperation. They're right up in front of it. One of the problems in India and Africa is that they've gone away from subsistence agriculture to commodity agriculture. And they've been caught up in agribusiness, and it's been quite a disaster. You may be aware of the incidence of farmer suicide in India. But look at this one down the bottom, for example, bottom right-hand side, zero budget natural farming, working with 1.1 million farmers, and they're wanting to have vegetation cover 365 days of the year if they can. That's their aspiration. Now they're doing something called pre-monsoon dry seeding. So Walter Jenner taught them about this atmospheric moisture, and he also so what he gets them to do, and they leaned into their own traditions, is to use various plant materials and dung and urine, and they develop sort of these balls that they put the seed in. And Walter told them that the microbiology in that ball would actually sort of go and reverse photosynthesis and release water. And also the seedlings were picking up water before the monsoon from the atmosphere. So that extended their growing season a lot. Just one other example from this, Rajendra Singh, who's called this is the top left, called the Waterman of India. It says here regeneration of 5 once dormant rivers, but it's more than that now. They've generated all of these water harvesting techniques, and for that part of Rajasthan, they have taken the vegetation cover from 2% to 50%, and they've reduced the temperature by 2 degrees.
Wow.
I asked for some sort of, evidence to that, but unfortunately, it hasn't been recorded. Cities. I don't know if anyone's been to Singapore, but this is I think it's the Hilton, and basically it's a green building. It's got a sort of the green footprint is about 5 times the actual footprint of the building. And yes, because Singapore's, of course, is right on the equator, so these things help a lot. You'll be aware of the phenomena of the heat island effect. So cities can be more than 2 degrees or more than what's around them, than neighbouring countryside. So it's really important to green those cities up. And I love the fact that in Whangarei we've got these beautiful murals, but we need some green walls too. It wouldn't be hard to do. I let just out my window here. You can't see it, but I've got a wisteria. It's just starting to flower now, and it's on the railing of the deck, and that's the northern side of the house. So I didn't actually think about this at the time, but by the time summer comes along, it's just that area is just covered in vegetation, and it's got to be cooling our house for us. Now, this wasn't in my book. I've just been working on this, given my work with Te Kaho Taonui. But those elements, the wind, the water, the soil, the sea, and whatever the best Māori word for plants is, I don't know. They're all interconnected, and I think it's really important we understand those interconnections. And if we can understand those and respect those, it all comes together, and it not only cools the climate, it provides our food, our well-being, and it ensures biodiversity, and especially the taonga species that we privilege. So the last 3 or 4 chapters of the book are about the human dimension, because actually today I went to a hui led by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and they're talking about land use and how integrated land use may help over time. And I'm thinking that the most important landscape to work on is our brain, because if we carry on with the sort of behaviours we're exhibiting right now, we're doomed to fail, and the planet would be better off without us. So this is from Jeremy Rifkin, The Empathic Civilization, and I'll read it because it's beautiful, and I've read it several times. It's possible that we human beings who are soft-wired for empathic distress can extend our empathy to the entire human race as an extended family, and to our fellow creatures as part of our evolutionary family, and to the biosphere as part of our common community. If it's possible to imagine that, then we may be able to save our species and save our planet. If it's impossible to even imagine that, I can't see how we're going to make it. That leaves us on a point of thinking, what is your story of what it is to be human? Are we inherently warlike, or do you think we can pull this off? Yeah, so that's it, Maggie.
Oh, well, if you can unshare screen again. I think, I mean, for me, that last quote is kind of really encapsulates everything what you're saying, and also what we have in common, and why I asked you to join in the PlantLab conversation, which is that we've got to start thinking differently or engaging differently than we have, and kind of making those more nuanced and engaging in more nuanced conversations or understandings of how we're working on the planet. And also not just that, but I think there's a kind of almost spiritual undercurrent of what was just said, which is we need to start thinking more in a more systemic way of brothers and sisters being sort of plants, not just our immediate family. So we can almost stretch to our neighbours, but do we stretch to our communities? Do we stretch to those around the globe? And do we also stretch to the beings and things that operate around us, which are actually part of our family in a certain kind of way? So I think it's kind of changing our mindset in a certain sense has got to be part of the process alongside the actions we're taking in the world. Otherwise, we're not changing the cause of what's actually the operating, generating thing underneath some of the problems we've got, right? So we can tackle all these different things, but we've also got to change the mindset that created them in the first place. But I mean, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I mean, if people are wanting to get hold of your book, Peter, how do they do that?
Well, it's available on Amazon because it's full color. It was expensive to print. I've published it myself, but it's also on Amazon. They can get it from me if they want it. I'm selling it for $40, but that would include postage. But it's also available as Kindle for $7, I think, on Amazon, or $6 or whatever. Yeah,
which involves less plants being ironically.
And I'm actually quite pleased with the way it's turned out. I mean, on my phone, it's sort of those numbers in those thermal images are visible. So yeah, I was quite happy with that. Yeah.
And you're going to be popping into PlantLab sometime during the time that we're in there, so we can have an opportunity to have a chat with you, and people can get in touch via myself and the link that we put online to this video. But I think in terms of what's your next stage of your research, Peter? What are you focused on, or what's your next project?
Well, just recently I've teamed up with 4 people, including myself, and we put together an open letter and sent it off to Cabinet about climate policy. We got a response that was pretty much expected from the Minister of Climate Change. He actually says that you can't really sequester carbon, and that's actually part of the truism that's out there in the science policy world. And he was talking that 4 years ago. There's actually more progress in agriculture. There's been the government has supported quite a bit of research into regenerative agriculture, and so that's a really strong stretch. But we're locked into this IPCC view of the world, and you'd be aware of Thomas Kuhn, and his So there's a paradigm shift that has to happen away from that sort of sole greenhouse gas story to a much more nature-based set of nature-based solutions. Yeah, there's also some really good events coming up in October too, around the world, looking at, for example, there's the Eco Restoration Alliance and the Global Repair Foundation. A lot of people are actually looking to this as a solution, but we've been captured by that paradigm, unfortunately. And the other thing I'm doing, that I'm intending that page I showed you with the energy budget to be the first page, and I want to expand on those 6 points. Check with Walter Yenna, because he can tell me if there's more points. But it's really interesting, because instead of just having one avenue, like reduction or or sequestration, we have 4 or 5 avenues now. So, yeah.
So I think that's the bit that I'd like to end on, because I think it's really positive, and I think it's constructive. And I think that's one of the things that PlantLab's about. It's like, how do we look at constructive, complex responses that are outside the silos of the ways of thinking that we have already. So thank you again for being involved in this, Peter. You're very valued, and your input is extremely welcome. Thank you again to Ministry of Culture and Heritage for supporting our webinar, and for Zoom webinars for supporting this series of online workshops and conversations, and look forward to seeing how it evolves next.
Thank you very much, Maggie. That's great.